Hi everyone. Okay, so here is our week 4 lesson on the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. Okay, so you need to watch the video. It's the brain pop for the Great Depression. And so it helps explain a little bit more what it was like throughout the whole US. All right, so the Dust Bowl. During World War I, demand for wheat was high. High wheat prices led farmers to plant more of the crop. When the war ended, prices dropped quickly. Farmers planted more wheat to make up for low prices, which only caused the price to drop even more. By 1932, prices were only about 20% of what they had been in 1920. Okay, so during the war, remember, we're not fighting in America. All the fighting is happening in Europe. So although the US got involved after the Zimmerman Note, we're not actually physically fighting in the US. So this means that the US is really supplying most of Europe with a food source because European countryside where they had been farming is being ripped up and fought over. After the war though, Europe kind of recovers and so they start reproducing their own food and so they don't need the US's food anymore. But the prices drop because there's less of a demand. But that causes farmers to not make as much money. And if they had taken out loans to maybe buy new equipment or buy more land when prices were good, they're now losing money and they can't repay back the banks. So farmers' overplanting of wheat contributed to a natural disaster. In the 1930s, the Great Plains had a record high temperatures and severe droughts. When the wheat plants died, there was nothing to keep the soil in place. Then the region was struck by unusually strong windstorms. This wind picked up the soil and formed huge dust storms. The blowing dust seeped into homes, suffocating some livestock and caused many people to develop lung problems. As a result, the southern Great Plains, including western Texas, was nicknamed the Dust Bowl. Okay, so in this area that the farmers had been growing wheat, we call like the breadbasket of America, the whole middle section of the US, which includes the top portion of Texas and the panhandle. Now, they'd been overproducing wheat, so they weren't letting the ground like recover from all the farming. And so they were just tilling up the soil, turning it over, and so it didn't allow grass to grow, and they didn't have trees or anything like that to hold the soil down. So when they have this huge drought happen, this is going to kill all the wheat plants because this is before like we have the massive irrigation systems we do now that kind of help prevent that. And so the plants dry up and there's nothing holding this dry dirt to the ground. And so when a wind comes in, there's nothing holding it down, so it just picks it up and carries it. And we see these massive like clouds of dust roll in. And these could last for days if it was bad enough. But some of the biggest side effects are going to be lung issues on people. So many farmers gave up, abandoning their land. Others lost their land to banks when they could not make loan payments. About 1/3 of the farmers in the panhandle region of Texas left the area, so a lot will migrate and they're going to go towards California. So number 1, how were the huge dust storms created? Number 2, highlight or underline 2 effects of the Dust Bowl. Okay, so 2 things that happen because of it. All right, the Great Depression begins. After World War I, the oil business was booming and oil-related industries were thriving in Texas. But the stock market, which is a place to buy pieces of a company, had problems. Investors kept borrowing money from banks to buy stocks. For 6 years, stock prices rose and investors profited, but stock prices began to fall. Okay, so when you buy a piece of stock, we do that like the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, that's what you might be seeing on the news right now. That's just you're owning a piece of the company. So you're investing in the company, and if the company does well, you'll get money back, but if the company doesn't, you'll lose money. The company started losing money, and so investors are not going to be making that money that they borrowed back. And so a lot of them will just try to cut their losses and sell it right away. But that just means the pieces of the company start becoming worth less and less because less people are putting money into it. And so then more people are going to start selling off their stocks, and it's just going to create this ripple down effect. On October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday, stocks lost most of their value. This first drop in stock prices caused the stock market to crash. The crash launched the Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to 1945. So this lasted 16 years, okay? And this little diagram right here kind of gives you it's like a circular flow, okay? So the stock market crashes on October 29th. So then investors that maybe took out loans to buy stocks can't repay them because they didn't make any money. So then the banks aren't getting money back on their loans, and so they have to close. Meaning if you had your money in there, you don't have any money anymore. That means a lot of factories and businesses are going to close if they had loans with a bank. And that means people lose their jobs, so they can't buy things, which causes more factories to close. And then it just keeps going in a big circle. That's why it lasted so long. Okay, life in Texas during the early 1930s. So in the early years of the Depression, Texans and their communities tried to provide relief for those who were hit hardest. Merchants offered credit so people could buy goods they needed. Businesses supported gardens to grow needed food. Many communities raised money to help feed the hungry. However, soon people began to look to the government for help. At first, many sharecroppers and tenant farmers did not look for help. Instead, they relocated in search of work. More than 200,000 Mexican Americans left Texas for Mexico. Government officials hoped this relocation of workers would open jobs for others. So a lot of people who had maybe lived in Mexico moved to the US when it was doing really well during the war. They decided, you know what, it's not as bad in Mexico, I'm going to move back. And so the government hoped those jobs would help. Kind of does, but not a ton. So number 3, what were 3 ways Texans responded to the Great Depression? So 3 ways. Look in these 2 paragraphs. During the Depression, unemployment rates for African Americans were 2 to 3 times higher than those of whites. Government agencies often denied aid to African Americans or gave them less money than they gave to white citizens. Many African Americans left Texas farms to look for work in cities. Okay, so this boils down to racism. It's not that they weren't qualified for some jobs, it's just pure racism. Okay. Number 4, highlight why many African Americans left Texas. So find in that paragraph where it talked about why they left. All right, finally, your visual analysis. So this is a picture of a farm during the Dust Bowl. So based on this picture, which region of Texas would be affected most by the Dust Bowl? So remember our 4 regions are coastal plains, north central plains, Great Plains, and mountains and basins. So which of those 4 would be most affected by the Dust Bowl? Number 6, how did the Dust Bowl affect the people living in the area? So how did what you see here affect the people? Okay, now this is your opinion, but kind of you can look back on what we've read if you want to come up with your answer there. So if you have any questions, don't forget to email me. Bye.